The red sand of Kepler. 442C crunched beneath Zara Chen's boots as she stepped off the transport shuttle. The dying world stretched endlessly before her, its crimson dunes hiding the remnants of what her scanners insisted had once been a thriving ecosystem. At 19, she was the youngest terraforming engineer the Galactic Restoration Initiative had ever sent on a solo mission, but her academic scores and innovative water reclamation designs had earned her this chance. "Just another dead rock," she muttered, adjusting the atmosphere processor on her back. The device hummed quietly, converting the thin, poisonous air into something her lungs could handle. According to the orbital surveys, Kepler 442c had been lifeless for over 3 centuries, its water stripped away by solar radiation after its magnetic field collapsed. Her mission was straightforward: assess the planet's potential for atmospheric reconstruction and determine if the mineral deposits were worth the terraforming investment. Corporate expected her preliminary report within 72 hours. Simple enough, except for the nagging feeling that something about this world felt different. The first anomaly appeared on her scanner 20 minutes into her survey. A massive underground structure, roughly 12 kilometers beneath the surface, showed thermal signatures that defied explanation. The readings suggested something was generating heat down there, which was impossible on a planet declared geologically dead for centuries. Zara paused at the edge of what appeared to be an ancient crater. Her scanner beeped insistently, indicating the strongest readings were directly below. She knelt and placed her hand on the ground, feeling a subtle vibration that seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. "What are you hiding?" she whispered to the barren landscape. Her geological probe required 3 hours to drill deep enough to reach the anomaly. When the drill finally broke through into what appeared to be a vast underground chamber, Zara's equipment registered something that made her heart race. Traces of moisture in the air, impossibly pure water vapor rising from the depths. The descent took another hour. Her portable lift system lowered her through layers of sediment and crystallized rock until she emerged into a cavern so vast that her headlamp couldn't illuminate its boundaries. The air here was different, thick with humidity that her parched throat welcomed gratefully. But it was the centerpiece of the chamber that stole her breath entirely. A creature of impossible beauty lay coiled in the center of the cavern, its form partially encased in what appeared to be translucent crystal. Even in its imprisoned state, Zara could see it was magnificent. The being resembled the ancient dragons from Earth's mythology, but larger and more elegant. Its scales shifted between deep sapphire and silver, and membranous wings stretched nearly 100 meters from tip to tip, though they appeared withered and dry. The crystal prison wasn't complete. The creature's head remained free, though clearly weakened. As Zara approached, massive eyes opened, revealing irises that swirled like liquid starlight. The intelligence behind those eyes was unmistakable, ancient, and profound. "Please," a voice echoed in her mind, not spoken, but somehow transmitted directly to her consciousness. The mental voice was weak, desperate, tinged with centuries of suffering. "Water. I have been so long without water." Zara's hand instinctively moved to the emergency water recycler on her belt. Standard protocol for unknown alien contact was immediate withdrawal and reporting to command. But something in those ancient eyes stopped her. This wasn't a monster or a threat. This was a being in agony. "Who are you?" she asked aloud, surprised that she could speak at all. "I am Kithara," the mental voice replied, gaining slight strength. "Guardian of the water worlds, protector of the sacred springs. I have waited in this prison for 347 of your years, sustained only by the moisture in the stone around me. But it is not enough. I am dying, small one." The crystal encasement seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. As Zara moved closer, she could see intricate patterns carved into its surface, clearly technological rather than natural. Someone or something had deliberately imprisoned this creature here. "Why are you trapped?" Zara asked, her engineering mind already analyzing the crystal structure. The hegemony. Kithra's mental voice carried bitter hatred. They feared our power over water, our ability to create and nurture life. They built these prisons across the galaxy, trapping my kind wherever they found us. This world was lush once, rich with rivers and seas. I was its guardian until they came. Zara's scanner confirmed what Kithra's words suggested. The traces of ancient irrigation systems, the mineral deposits consistent with dried lake beds, the geological evidence of massive climate change. This hadn't been natural planetary death. It had been murder on a planetary scale. The others of your species? She asked. Gone. Kithra replied simply. I may be the last. The hegemony was thorough in their genocide. Zara studied the crystal prison more carefully. Her engineering background helped her recognize the energy patterns flowing through the translucent material. It was sophisticated beyond anything in current galactic technology, designed specifically to drain and contain whatever it held. The patterns suggested it was weakening, perhaps finally running out of power after centuries of operation. What happens if I help you? She asked. Kithra's great head lifted slightly, hope flickering in those cosmic eyes. I do not know, small one. I have been imprisoned so long that I barely remember what it feels like to be free. But if you could share even a small amount of pure water, it might give me strength to break these final bonds. Zara looked at her water recycler. It contained perhaps 3 liters of purified water, meant to sustain her for emergency situations. Corporate regulations were clear about water conservation on dead worlds. But regulations hadn't anticipated this situation. More importantly, her human instincts rebelled against leaving any sentient being to suffer when she had the power to help. She made her decision. Unscrewing the cap of her emergency water container, Zara approached Kithra's massive head. I don't know what this would do to my mission, but I can't leave you like this. You would help me, knowing nothing of what I might do once freed. Kithra asked, genuine surprise coloring the mental communication. You asked for help, Zara replied simply. That's enough. As she poured the first drops of water onto Kithra's parched scales, something remarkable happened. The liquid seemed to glow as it touched the alien skin, spreading across the surface like liquid light. Kithra's eyes closed in what appeared to be ecstasy, and the mental connection between them strengthened dramatically. More, Kithra whispered urgently. Please, I can feel the bindings weakening. Zara poured the rest of her water supply onto the dragon's head and neck. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The crystal prison began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across its surface as Kithra's body began to glow with an inner light. Stand back, brave little guardian, Kithra warned. I cannot control what happens next. Zara retreated to what she hoped was a safe distance as the crystal structure began to disintegrate. Light poured from the cracks, growing brighter and more intense until she had to shield her eyes. The cavern filled with a sound like breaking glass, mixed with rushing water. When the light finally faded, Kithra stood free for the first time in over 3 centuries. Even weakened, the dragon was magnificent, scales now gleaming with renewed vitality, wings spread in a display of power and gratitude. You have given me life, Zara, Kithra said, and somehow the dragon knew her name. In return, let me show you what this world once was, and what could be again. The dragon's eyes began to glow, and suddenly, Zara could see the cavern as it truly was, filled with the ghostly images of flowing water, lush vegetation, and creatures she couldn't identify, but somehow knew belonged here. This is what the hegemony destroyed, Kithra explained. This is what we can restore together, if you are willing to trust a creature from the old times. Zara stared at the visions of life and abundance, then at her now empty water container. She thought about her mission parameters, her corporate obligations, and the safe, predictable career that awaited her if she simply reported this as another failed world. Then, she looked into Kithra's ancient, grateful eyes and realized that some discoveries were worth any risk. Tell me how, she said. Kithra's massive form moved through the cavern with surprising grace, despite centuries of imprisonment. As the dragon walked, droplets of moisture seemed to condense from the air around her scales, falling to the stone floor where tiny sprouts of crystalline vegetation immediately began to grow. "You must understand what you have awakened," Kithra said, settling into a position that allowed her to face Zara directly. "My people were not simply guardians of water. We were water in a sense that your language cannot fully express." Zara pulled out her portable scanner, noting the impossible readings. The humidity in the cavern had increased by 40% in just a few minutes since Kithra's freedom. More remarkably, the water appearing around the dragon registered as perfectly pure, free of any contamination or mineral content that should have been present in an underground environment. "Your people," Zara prompted, settling cross-legged on the stone floor. Her training had taught her that understanding alien cultures was often more valuable than any technological discovery. Kithra's great head lowered, bringing those cosmic eyes level with Zara's. "We called ourselves the HFY in your tongue, though our true name cannot be spoken by beings who lack our connection to water. For millions of years, we traveled the galaxy, finding dead worlds and bringing them to life. We were gardeners on a cosmic scale." Images began to flow through their mental connection. Zara saw worlds of impossible beauty, vast oceans teeming with life, floating cities connected by waterways that defied gravity, creatures of every imaginable form living in harmony with environments perfectly balanced for their needs. "We had no interest in conquest or expansion," Kithra continued. "Our joy came from creation, from watching sterile rocks become gardens, from nurturing new forms of life. Each world we touched became unique, shaped by its own needs and potential." "What changed?" Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The mental images shifted, becoming darker. Massive ships of unfamiliar design appeared in the visions, their hulls black as space itself. The beings that emerged from these ships were humanoid but wrong somehow, their movements too precise, their eyes holding no warmth or individuality. "The hegemony discovered us approximately 800 years ago," Kithra explained. "They were an ancient species, older than my people, but they had chosen a different path. Where we created, they consumed. Where we nurtured diversity, they demanded conformity." Zara watched in horror as the visions showed the hegemony's systematic destruction of the water worlds. Not content to simply kill the HFY, they seemed intent on erasing every trace of their existence, sterilizing the worlds they had brought to life. "They feared us," Kithra said, sadness permeating the mental connection. "Not because we were powerful in war, but because our very existence proved that their way was not the only way. Every world we had touched stood as evidence that life could flourish without their rigid control." "But you fought back," Zara said. It wasn't a question. The precision of Kithra's imprisonment suggested the hegemony had considered the HFY a significant threat. "We tried," Kithra admitted, "but we were creators, not destroyers. Our power was meant to nurture life, not end it." The hegemony had spent millennia perfecting the art of war. They had weapons that could turn our own connection to water against us. The visions showed the final battles, if they could be called that. Massive crystal structures like the one that had imprisoned Kithra appeared around the water worlds, drawing the life force from both the HFY and the worlds they protected. It wasn't warfare so much as systematic harvesting. "They trapped us in these prisons," Kithra continued, "and used our power to drain the worlds we had created. Every drop of water, every living thing, was consumed to feed their expansion. They left nothing behind but empty rocks and the prisons that held us, slowly draining what remained of our life force." Zara's engineering mind was racing, but the prison was weakening. I could see the power fluctuations in the crystal matrix. "Time," Kithra replied simply. "The hegemony built their prisons to last millennia, but not forever. They expected us to die long before the crystals failed. They did not account for how desperately we would cling to life, hoping that someday somehow, help would come. Where is the hegemony now? Zara asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Kithara was quiet for a long moment. Gone, I believe. My connection to the cosmic waters tells me that they expanded too far, consumed too much. They turned their weapons on each other when they ran out of other species to harvest. The galaxy has been free of their shadow for nearly 2 centuries. Zara felt a chill despite the warm, humid air in the cavern. So you've been imprisoned here for over a century after they were already extinct? Yes, Kithara confirmed. Waiting, hoping, slowly dying as the last traces of moisture were drained from the stone around me. Until today. Until you. The dragon's massive head moved closer, and Zara could feel the gentle warmth radiating from her scales. Tell me of your people, Zara-chun. In all my long memory, I have never encountered a species like yours. Zara laughed, though it came out a bit shaky. We're not that special. Just another species that figured out space travel a few hundred years ago. Still fighting wars, still making mistakes, still trying to figure out our place in the galaxy. No, Kithara said firmly. You are far more than that. In 347 years of imprisonment, thousands of beings have passed over this world. Survey teams, mining expeditions, treasure hunters. Some even detected my presence. But not one of them chose to investigate. Not one of them chose to help. The mental connection carried images of the various species that had visited the dead world. Zara saw beings of every imaginable form. Tall, graceful humanoids with technology far advanced beyond humanity's. Crystalline entities that seemed to exist partially in other dimensions. Collective consciousnesses that moved through space like living storms. They were all more advanced than your species, Kithara noted. Stronger, smarter, more powerful. But when faced with an unknown situation, they chose safety. They chose to follow their protocols and regulations. They chose to preserve themselves rather than risk helping a stranger. Zara shifted uncomfortably. That's just common sense. How were they supposed to know you weren't dangerous? They weren't, Kithara agreed. But you didn't know either. You saw a being in suffering and chose compassion over caution. That choice, Zara-chun, is why your species may be the most remarkable I have ever encountered. The dragon's tail curled around the cavern, and where it touched the stone, small pools of crystal-clear water began to form. The Aquari spent millions of years searching for the secret of what makes some species capable of great creation while others can only destroy. We theorized, we debated, we experimented. We never found the answer. And now you think humans have that answer? Zara asked skeptically. I think, Kithara said carefully, that your species possesses something rare in the galaxy. The ability to choose hope over fear, curiosity over caution, compassion over self-preservation. You are young as galactic species go, but you have something that the oldest and most powerful civilizations often lose. Zara stood up and walked to one of the pools Kithara had created. The water was impossibly pure, and when she cupped it in her hands, it seemed to glow with its own inner light. What do you want from me, Kithara? I'm just one person. I can't restore an entire world. Can't you? Kithara asked, amusement coloring the mental connection. You freed me when no one else would try. You gave me your water when regulations said to conserve it. You chose to trust when logic said to flee. These are not the actions of just one person. These are the actions of someone who understands that the impossible is simply the possible waiting for the right moment. The dragon's eyes began to glow with renewed vitality. Besides, you will not be working alone. I still remember how to call water from stone, how to coax life from barren ground. Together, we can make this world bloom again. But, more than that, we can send a message to the galaxy. What kind of message? That the age of fear is ending, Kithara replied. That there are still species willing to choose creation over destruction, hope over despair. Your people are young, Zara-chun, but youth can accomplish what age and experience no longer dare to attempt. Zara looked around the cavern, seeing it now not as a tomb, but as a seed waiting to grow. Her scanner showed impossible readings, water purity beyond anything her instruments could explain, the first signs of life beginning to stir in the stone itself. She thought about her mission parameters, about the corporate report that was due in less than 60 hours. Then, she looked at Kithara, the last of her kind, offering to share the secrets of galactic gardening with a 19-year-old human who had just thrown away her career by giving water to a stranger. "Tell me what we need to do," she said. Zara's hands moved rapidly across her portable workstation as she tried to make sense of the data streaming in from her instruments. In the 6 hours since Kithara's awakening, the environmental readings from the underground cavern had become increasingly impossible to explain using conventional science. "The water you're creating," she said, looking up from her screens, "my sensors can't determine its source. It's as if you're pulling hydrogen and oxygen directly out of quantum vacuum." Kithara's massive form was curled around the growing pools of crystal-clear water, her scales now gleaming with vitality that had been absent during her imprisonment. Small plants that resembled living jewels were beginning to sprout from the cavern floor, their crystalline leaves catching and refracting the light from Zara's equipment. "Not creating," Kithara corrected gently. "Calling. Water exists everywhere in the universe. Zara, Chun, even in the spaces between atoms. The Aquari learned long ago how to ask it to gather, how to convince it to take the form most needed for life. That's—" Zara paused, trying to wrap her engineering mind around the concept. "That's not how physics works." "Your physics," Kithara replied with gentle amusement. "Tell me, young engineer, when your species first looked at birds, did they conclude that flight was impossible because humans lacked wings?" Zara had a smile at that. "Point taken. But this seems different. You're not just flying. You're apparently violating conservation of energy on a planetary scale." "Am I?" Kithara's mental voice carried curiosity rather than offense. "Or am I simply working with forces your species hasn't learned to measure yet?" Before Zara could respond, her communication device chimed with an incoming message from orbit. The corporate transport that had dropped her off was requesting a preliminary status report. "Prometheus Station to Surface Team Chun." The voice crackled through the speaker. "Please confirm your status and provide initial assessment data for the Kepler 442c viability study." Zara looked at Kithara, then at the growing garden of impossible plants spreading across the cavern floor. She thought about her carefully planned career trajectory, her student loans that wouldn't be forgiven if she was terminated for filing false reports, and the safe, predictable future that awaited her if she simply declared this world unsuitable for terraforming and moved on to the next assignment. Then, she looked at the last surviving member of a species that had spent millions of years bringing life to dead worlds. "Surface Team Chun to Prometheus Station," she replied, making her choice. "Preliminary assessment indicates significant potential for atmospheric restoration. Request additional time to complete full geological survey." "Understood, Surface Team. You have an additional 48 hours before scheduled pickup. Prometheus Station out." Kithara's great head tilted in what might have been approval. "You choose to gamble your future on an ancient dragon and a cavern full of impossible water? I choose to find out what's possible before deciding what's practical," Zara replied. "Besides, if you can really restore this world, the corporate implications alone are worth the risk. Do you have any idea what terraforming contracts are worth?" "I have no understanding of your economic systems," Kithara admitted. "But I suspect you're not doing this for monetary gain." Zara blushed, realizing she'd been caught trying to rationalize what was essentially a leap of faith. "You're right. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, and because I've never seen anything like what you're showing me." "Then, let's begin properly," Kithara said, rising to her full height. "The restoration of a world requires more than water, though water is the foundation of all life. We must wake the sleeping stone, coax the shy minerals into new forms, and prepare the very ground to receive what we will create." The dragon moved to the center of the cavern, her movements creating currents in the humid air that seemed to follow patterns Zara couldn't quite understand. As Kithara settled into a position that reminded Zara of meditation poses she'd seen in ancient human traditions, the water around them began to glow more brightly. "Place your hands in the pools," Kithara instructed. "The connection between us must be strengthened if you are to help guide this process." Zara hesitated for only a moment before kneeling beside the nearest pool and placing her palms flat on the water surface. The liquid was warm, almost body temperature, and it seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Immediately, her awareness expanded beyond the confines of the cavern. She could sense the vast network of underground chambers that honeycombed the planet's crust, most of them empty and lifeless. But here and there, she detected traces of dormant life, organisms that had somehow survived centuries in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the return of water. "I can feel them," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "There are still living things down here. The Aquari built our gardens to endure," Kithara explained, her mental voice now resonating directly through the water connection. "We learned that life is remarkably persistent when given even the smallest chance to survive. This world may appear dead to your instruments, but it has been sleeping, not dying." Through their shared connection, Zara felt Kithara begin to work. It was unlike anything she could have imagined, a process that seemed to involve convincing the fundamental forces of the planet to remember what they had once been. Water began to seep from the stone walls, at first just a few drops, then small streams that carved new channels through the cavern floor. But it was more than just water. Zara could sense nutrients flowing through the liquid, complex organic compounds that her training told her should take millions of years to form naturally. The dragon was somehow accelerating processes that should require geological timescales, compressing eons of evolution into hours. "How are you doing this?" Zara asked, her scientific mind struggling to comprehend what she was witnessing. "I'm not doing," Kithara replied. "I am asking, requesting, convincing the elements to remember their purpose. The Aquari discovered long ago that the universe prefers life to death, order to chaos, growth to stagnation. We simply learned how to translate those preferences into reality." As if to demonstrate, Kithara focused her attention on a section of the cavern wall. The stone began to shimmer, and Zara watched in amazement as crystal formations began to grow, not in the random patterns of natural geological processes, but in elegant spirals that seemed designed to channel and purify water. "Your species has a word," Kithara continued, "that comes closer than most to describing what we do. You call it biomimicry, the practice of learning from natural processes to improve your technology. The Aquari learned to mimic not just life, but the fundamental forces that make life possible." Through the water connection, Zara found herself understanding concepts that her engineering education had never covered. She began to see the patterns Kithara was weaving, the way the dragon was creating feedback loops that would allow the restoration process to become self-sustaining. "I can help," Zara realized suddenly. "My atmospheric processors, my mineral extractors, if we modify them to work with your patterns instead of against them." "Yes," Kithara agreed, excitement flowing through their mental link. "This is why your species may be the key to restoring what the hegemony destroyed. You have the technology to amplify what the Aquari began. Together, we can work faster than either of our species could manage alone." Zara pulled her hands from the water and immediately began modifying her equipment. Her training in adaptive engineering served her well as she reconfigured her atmosphere processor to work with the humidity patterns Kithara was creating rather than simply filtering the existing air. The result was immediate and dramatic. Instead of producing a small bubble of breathable atmosphere, her modified processor began to amplify the water-rich air Kithara was generating, creating currents that carried moisture and nutrients throughout the ever-expanding network of caverns. "It's working," Zara said, watching her instruments register atmospheric improvements that should have taken decades to achieve. "The air composition is shifting towards something that could support complex life." This is only the beginning, Kithara warned. To truly restore this world, we must reach the surface. We must convince the dead seas to flow again, the sterile soil to accept new growth. And we must do it before your people return to collect you. Zara checked her chronometer. They had less than 40 hours before the Prometheus station would send a shuttle to retrieve her. 40 hours to accomplish what normally took terraforming teams decades, or even centuries. Then, we'd better get started, she said, beginning to calculate the modifications needed for her drilling equipment. Zara-chan, Kithara said softly, what we are about to attempt has never been tried before. An Aquari working with another species to restore a dead world. I cannot guarantee your safety, or even that we will succeed. Zara looked around the cavern, now filled with flowing water and crystalline plants that sparkled like living starlight. She thought about the safe assignment reports she could file, the predictable career advancement that awaited her if she simply walked away. Then, she thought about the dead worlds scattered throughout the galaxy, the countless species that might never know the beauty of what Kithara could create. Some things are worth the risk, she said simply. Kithara's ancient eyes reflected something that might have been tears, spoken like a true gardener of worlds. The drilling operation began at dawn on the second day. Zara had spent most of the night reconfiguring her equipment, creating a hybrid system that combined human engineering with the patterns Kithara had shown her. The result looked nothing like standard terraforming gear, bristling with crystalline formations that the dragon had grown to amplify the water-calling process. The first tunnel must reach the old seabed, Kithara explained as they worked. The dragon's massive form couldn't fit through the passages Zara was creating, but their mental connection remained strong enough for Kithara to guide the process. 17 kilometers northeast of here, buried under 300 meters of sediment, lies the heart of what was once this world's greatest ocean. Zara's modified drill moved through stone and compressed sediment with impossible efficiency. The crystalline growths Kithara had attached to her equipment seemed to soften the earth ahead of the drilling head, turning solid rock into something resembling wet clay that her machines could penetrate easily. This is incredible, Zara said, watching her progress indicators. I'm moving through solid granite, like it's loose soil. What are these crystals actually doing? Convincing, Kithara replied. The Aquari learned long ago that matter is more fluid than most species believe. Rock and water are simply different expressions of the same underlying patterns. We merely ask one to remember how to become the other. Through her drilling camera, Zara watched as the tunnel walls began to glisten with moisture. Not just condensation from the humid air they were pumping through the system, but actual water seeping from stone that should have been completely dry. It's working, she reported. I'm seeing water infiltration at every level. How is this possible? This world was not killed completely, Kithara explained. The hegemony's weapons drain the surface, but water seeks its own level. Some always finds a way to hide in the deep places. We are simply showing it that it is safe to emerge again. The drilling continued for 18 hours, with Zara taking only brief breaks to eat and check her equipment. By the time her drill finally broke through into the ancient seabed, she was exhausted but exhilarated. Her cameras showed a vast underground chamber, its floor covered with sediment that sparkled with deposits of crystallized salt from the vanished ocean. Now comes the difficult part, Kithara warned. I must extend my influence through your tunnel system, but I cannot leave this cavern yet. The water I have gathered here is still too fragile, too newly awakened. You must be my hands and eyes on the surface. Zara understood. She loaded her equipment with every piece of crystalline growth Kithara had created, essentially turning herself into a mobile extension of the dragon's power. The weight was significant, but her exoskeleton could handle the load. The journey through her tunnel system took 3 hours. When she finally emerged onto the surface of Kepler 442c, the sight that greeted her was nothing like the dead world she had first surveyed. The air shimmered with humidity, and her instruments detected atmospheric moisture levels that were increasing by the minute. But It was the sky that truly amazed her. What had been a harsh red wasteland now showed traces of blue as water vapor began to gather in the upper atmosphere. Clouds were forming for the first time in centuries, drawn by whatever processes Kithra was working deep below. "I can see it," Zara reported through their mental link. "The atmosphere is changing. You're actually doing it." "We are doing it," Kithra corrected. "Without your technology to amplify and direct the process, I could only work within the limited sphere of my prison. But, with your help, my influence can reach across continents." Zara began placing the dragon's crystals at the coordinates Kithra provided. Each installation required her to drill deep into the sediment-covered seabed, planting the formations like seeds in the sterile soil. As each crystal activated, water began to bubble up through the sand, forming small springs that quickly grew into flowing streams. The transformation was faster than anything Zara had imagined possible. Within hours of placing the first crystal, she was standing on what was becoming a marsh. The ancient seabed was remembering its purpose, and water was returning to places that had been dry for 300 years. But it wasn't just water. The streams carried microorganisms that shouldn't have existed, complex life forms that her scanners couldn't identify, but that were clearly thriving in the newly awakened environment. Kithra wasn't just creating water. She was resurrecting an entire ecosystem from whatever traces had survived the hegemony's devastation. "The life forms I'm seeing," Zara said, collecting samples with her field kit. "Some of them don't match any genetic patterns in the galactic database. They're completely unique to this world." "As they should be," Kithra replied, satisfaction flowing through their connection. Every world the HFY touched was encouraged to develop its own forms of life, suited to its unique conditions. "We believe diversity was the greatest treasure in the universe." By the end of the second day, Zara was standing knee-deep in a lake that stretched to the horizon. The transformation was so complete that she had trouble believing it had taken only 48 hours. Her instruments detected fish-like creatures swimming in the crystal-clear water, while the air filled with the calls of beings that might have been birds if they hadn't been made of what appeared to be living light. "This is impossible," she said, though she was laughing as she said it. "I'm a terraforming engineer. I know how long this process is supposed to take. What you've accomplished here should require decades of work by teams of specialists." "Time," Kithra replied, "is more flexible than your species believes. The HFY learned to work with the planet's own desire to live. We do not force change. We simply remove the obstacles that prevent what wants to happen naturally." Zara's communication device chimed with an incoming message from the Prometheus station. The pickup shuttle would arrive in 6 hours. "They're coming," she reported to Kithra. "What do I tell them?" There was a long pause before the dragon replied. "Tell them the truth. That Kepler 442c is not the dead world it appeared to be. That it is capable of supporting life beyond anything their surveys predicted. That it may be the most valuable discovery your species has ever made. And what about you? They'll want to study you, catalog you, probably turn you into a research subject. I can't let that happen." Kithra's mental voice carried warmth and gratitude. "Do not concern yourself with my safety, brave gardener. I have spent centuries learning how to hide from those who would exploit me. But, more importantly, this world is alive now. It has its own defenses, its own ways of protecting what belongs here." As if to demonstrate, the lake around Zara began to glow with soft blue light. The crystalline formations Kithra had grown throughout the restoration process were creating a network of energy that Zara's instruments couldn't fully analyze. Whatever it was, it felt protective, watchful, alive. "The HFY always build guardians into our gardens," Kithra explained. "This world will welcome visitors who come in peace, but it will discourage those who come to exploit or destroy. Your species will be welcome here, Zara-chun, because you have proven your intentions. Others may find it more challenging to land." As the hours passed, Zara prepared her report. She documented the water restoration, the atmospheric changes, the emergence of complex life forms. She included readings that defied conventional science and recommended immediate reclassification of Kepler 442C as a priority world for peaceful contact and study. When the shuttle arrived, the pilot's reaction was worth recording. The man had expected to land on a dead rock, and instead found himself setting down beside a crystal-clear lake surrounded by forests of luminescent trees that shouldn't have existed. "Chin, what the hell happened down here?" Captain Torres demanded as he emerged from the shuttle. "Our orbital scans showed this world was completely sterile 48 hours ago. Preliminary assessment was incomplete," Zara replied calmly. "The ecosystem was dormant, not dead. I was able to trigger a restoration cascade that returned the environment to its natural state." "You triggered?" Torres stared at the impossible landscape around them. "Chun, I've been doing planetary surveys for 20 years. This isn't possible. Not in 48 hours. Not with standard terraforming equipment." Zara smiled, thinking of Kithra's ancient wisdom about impossible things simply being possible things waiting for their moment. "Captain, I think we need to expand our definition of what's possible." As they prepared for departure, Zara felt Kithra's presence in her mind one last time. "This is not goodbye, young gardener," the dragon said. "You carry part of this world with you now, and it will call you back when you're ready to help wake the next sleeping garden. The galaxy has many dead worlds waiting for the right touch to bring them back to life." "Will you be here when I return?" Zara asked. "I will be where I am needed," Kithra replied. "But this world will remember your kindness, as will I. You have given the Aquari our first ally in 800 years. That is a gift beyond any treasure." As the shuttle lifted off from the shores of the impossible lake, Zara watched the restored world fall away beneath them. In her mind, she was already planning her next assignment request, thinking about all the dead worlds scattered throughout human space that might not be as lifeless as they appeared. Behind her, the waters of Kepler, 442C sparkled with bioluminescent life, and somewhere in the depths, an ancient dragon smiled and began to dream of the gardens yet to be planted. 3 months after her return from Kepler, 442C, Zara stood before the Galactic Council Science Committee, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. The presentation screen behind her showed images that had already sparked heated debates across human space. Impossible lakes surrounded by crystalline forests, atmospheric readings that defied known terraforming principles, and life forms that seemed to exist partially in dimensions beyond normal space. "The implications of your report are staggering," Engineer Chun said. Counselor Vex, a tall humanoid whose species had perfected terraforming technology millennia before humans had achieved spaceflight. "You claim to have restored a dead world in less than 48 hours using methods that contradict fundamental principles of physics." "I claim nothing," Zara replied calmly. "I report what I observed and participated in. The evidence speaks for itself." Chairman Coral, an elderly human who had spent his career mediating disputes between species with radically different worldviews, leaned forward in his seat. "Engineer Chun, you must understand our skepticism. The Kepler 442C restoration, if genuine, represents technology beyond anything currently known to galactic civilization. The strategic implications alone." "This isn't about strategy or technology," Zara interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "It's about partnership, about learning from species that spent millions of years perfecting harmony with natural forces instead of trying to dominate them." The chamber fell silent. Several counselors exchanged glances that spoke of private communications flowing through their neural links. Finally, Counselor Themis of the Crystalline Collective spoke, her voice resonating like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You speak of this Kithra as if she still exists. Our deep space monitoring stations detect no large life forms on Kepler 442C. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Zara had expected this question. The orbital surveys conducted after her return had indeed failed to detect Kithra's presence. But she had learned enough about the Aquari to understand why. "The Aquari learn to exist in harmony with their environments," she explained. "Kithra doesn't inhabit Kepler 442C in the way we might think of inhabitation. She has become part of the world's ecosystem, existing within the water cycle itself. She's not hiding from your sensors. She's become too integrated with natural processes for your instruments to distinguish her from the environment. Convenient, Counselor Vex said dryly. An unfindable alien with miraculous powers. You'll forgive our skepticism, Engineer Chun. Before Zara could respond, alerts began chiming throughout the council chamber. Chairman Coral's aide rushed forward, whispering urgently in his ear. The chairman's expression shifted from skepticism to amazement. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed beings, the chairman announced, we're receiving an emergency transmission from the Kepler system. It appears that 6 additional worlds in that sector have begun spontaneous atmospheric restoration. The chamber erupted in voices speaking dozens of languages. Zara felt her heart race as she realized what this meant. Kythera wasn't just restoring one world. She was using what they had accomplished together as a template, a proof of concept that could be replicated across the galaxy. Order, Chairman Coral called, though his own voice carried excitement. Engineer Chun, do you have any explanation for this development? Zara thought about her last conversation with Kythera, about the dragon's promise that their partnership was just the beginning. I believe Kythera is demonstrating what's possible when species work together instead of in isolation. She's not conquering those worlds. She's awakening them, giving them the chance to become what they were meant to be. More reports began flooding in. Worlds that have been... If what you suggest is true, Engineer Chun, then this HFY represents an opportunity beyond any we have encountered in recorded galactic history. The ability to restore worlds without the centuries-long terraforming process could revolutionize expansion and settlement. You're thinking about this wrong, Zara said, her voice carrying more authority than someone her age should have possessed. This isn't about faster expansion or easier resource extraction. This is about learning to live as partners with our environment instead of conquerors of it. Pretty words, Counselor Vex replied, but the practical implications remain. If this technology exists, every species in the galaxy will want access to it. How do you propose we manage such a resource fairly? Zara smiled, remembering Kythera's gentle amusement at the complexities of galactic politics. You don't manage it. You earn it. The HFY don't work with species that view their abilities as a resource to be exploited. They partner with those who understand that true wealth comes from creating more life, not consuming what already exists. The debate continued for hours, with representatives from dozens of species arguing about the implications of the Kepler transformations. Some demanded immediate expeditions to locate and study the HFY technology. Others insisted on military assessments of potential threats. A few called for trade negotiations to secure exclusive access to world restoration services. Through it all, Zara remained calm, answering questions with the patience she had learned from Kythera. But it was the arrival of the Andromedian delegation that truly changed the tenor of the discussion. The Andromedians were among the oldest species in the local galactic cluster, their civilization predating most others by millions of years. They rarely participated in council proceedings, considering most younger species too immature for meaningful dialogue. Their appearance now sent ripples of surprise through the chamber. Ambassador Ithris moved with the fluid grace of a being who had lived for millennia. When she spoke, her words carried the authority of deep time. Counselors, she began, the Andromedian archives contain records of a species matching Engineer Chen's description of the HFY. We knew them briefly, in the early days of our expansion, before they vanished from known space. The chamber fell silent, hanging on every word from the ancient ambassador. They were remarkable, Ambassador Ithris continued. Not powerful in the way of warriors or conquerors, but possessed of abilities that bordered on the miraculous. They could indeed restore dead worlds, but, more than that, they could help species transcend their limitations. Those who worked with the HFY often found themselves capable of achievements that had previously been impossible. Chairman Coral leaned forward intently. What happened to them? Why did they vanish? They were hunted, the ambassador replied grimly, by a species that feared what the HFY represented. a species that could not tolerate the existence of beings who proved that cooperation was more powerful than domination. Zara felt a chill of recognition. The hegemony. Ambassador Ithris nodded slowly. You know them? The archive suggests they were destroyed long ago. They were, Zara confirmed. Kithara told me they eventually turned their weapons on each other. But not before they imprisoned the last of the HFY and drained their worlds. Then, this Kithara may indeed be the last of her kind, the ambassador said softly. And her emergence now, her willingness to work with a younger species, may represent the galaxy's second chance to learn what the HFY tried to teach. The discussion that followed was different from what had come before. Instead of debate about resource management and strategic advantages, the counselors began talking about possibilities. About what galactic civilization might become if species learned to work together the way humans and HFY had on Kepler 442c. As the session concluded, Zara found herself surrounded by representatives from dozens of worlds, all wanting to know how they might earn the chance to partner with the last of the HFY. She answered their questions as best she could, but her mind was already elsewhere, already planning her return to Kepler 442c. That evening, alone in her quarters on the council station, Zara received a message on a private channel she hadn't given to anyone. When she activated the communication system, Kithara's familiar mental presence filled her mind. You did well today, young gardener, the dragon said, her voice carrying across impossible distances. The galaxy begins to understand what partnership might offer. Kithara, how are you reaching me here? Water exists everywhere, even in the life support systems of space stations, Kithara replied with gentle amusement. And once our connection was established, distance becomes less important than intention. Zara settled into a chair, allowing herself to relax for the first time since her presentation began. The council wants to send expeditions to meet you, to learn from you. Some of them have good intentions, but others see only an opportunity to gain advantage over their rivals, Kithara finished. Yes, I sense their thoughts through our connection. It is as I expected, but it is also why I chose to work with your species first. Why humans? We're not the oldest, or the wisest, or the most advanced. No, Kithara agreed, but you're the most flexible. Other species become set in their ways, convinced that their path is the only possible path. Humans remain curious, willing to change, capable of growth. You proved that when you chose to help a stranger despite every logical reason to walk away. Images began flowing through their mental connection. Zara saw the worlds that Kithara had awakened in the past 3 months, each one unique, each one perfectly adapted to the species that had discovered it. But more than that, she saw the changes in those species themselves. The way contact with restored worlds was inspiring new approaches to technology, society, and relationships with the natural world. This is what the HFY always dreamed of, Kithara explained. Not just the restoration of dead worlds, but the awakening of dormant potential in the species who tend them. You're all gardeners, Zara-chan. You have simply forgotten how to work with life instead of against it. What happens now? Zara asked. Now, Kithara replied, we plant more seeds. The galaxy has thousands of dead worlds waiting to be awakened, and millions of species ready to learn new ways of living. Our partnership has shown that it's possible. Now others must choose whether to follow that example or remain trapped in the old patterns of competition and conquest. Will you work with other species the way you worked with me? With those who prove themselves worthy of trust, Kithara confirmed. But the template we created together will guide all future partnerships. The combination of human innovation and HFY wisdom has created something neither of our species could have achieved alone. That synthesis will be the foundation for everything that follows. As their conversation continued deep into the station's night cycle, Zara realized that her life had been fundamentally changed by those 48 hours on Kepler 442c. She was no longer just a terraforming engineer following corporate protocols. She had become something new, a bridge between species, a gardener of possibilities. When the connection finally faded, Zara sat in the darkness of her quarters and smiled. Tomorrow she would submit her transfer request to the Deep Exploration Division. The galaxy was full of dead worlds that might not be as lifeless as they appeared, and she had work to do. Outside her viewport, the stars seemed to shimmer with new possibilities, as if the very fabric of space was awakening to the potential that partnership could unlock. And somewhere in the depths of a restored ocean on a world called Kepler 442c, an ancient dragon dreamed of gardens that stretched across the galaxy, tended by species who had finally learned to grow together rather than apart. The age of the gardeners had begun.